Salvete omnes. Hello, everyone. Welcome back as I continue our coverage of Caesar's Gallic Wars. Last time we were trying to get our horses to Britain, but a giant storm suddenly arose and we were unable to do so. So let's see what happens next. We pick up in Book 4, Section 29. So at this point, some ships with the horses were trying to make it. Some of them had to go back to the mainland, to France, and others went to the lower part of the island and are trying to weather the storm. Eadem nocte, accidit ut esset luna plena, qui dies maritimos aestos maximos in oceano efficere consuevit, nostrisque id erat incognitum. So, Eadem nocte, ablative of time when, on that same night, it happened that ut esset luna plena is an not an indirect statement. It is a result clause. Normally, with result clauses, we have a word like tom or tantus at the beginning, right? It was so dark that nobody could see the person in front of them. Or there were so many people around that nobody could hear the centurion's orders. Here we just have, on the same night, there was a result, that. So it happened that the moon was full, or happened that there was a full moon. Qui dies. Qui here, the relative pronoun, its antecedent is dies, actually, within the relative clause. It's nothing to do with luna plena. It's more closely associated with like nocta or something, or really just kind of this general statement. So it happened that there was a full moon. This day, and it's really kind of like this sort of day, this day was accustomed to bring about in the ocean, to cause in the ocean the greatest maritime tides, swells, something along those lines. So, when there was a full moon in this area, you tended to get these really big tides. You get high tide. All right. So, that sort of day was accustomed to bringing about the greatest or the largest maritime swells in the ocean. And, for our men, nostris is dative here. I think it's dative. And for our men, this was unknown. I always think of like, really? You're a group of, like, you're a people that spend all of your, like, Rome is 8 miles from the coast. You at least are aware of the tides in the ocean and the moon's effect on them. And you're telling me that Caesar's men were surprised by a high tide on a full moon? I don't know. I don't know if maybe the tides are different in Britain and Rome, but I feel like Caesar may have goofed here. Or his men did, but it's okay because, they didn't know any better, so it's fine. We'll make things work. Ita uno tempore et longas naves, quibus Caesar executum transportandum curaverat, quas Caesar in ardum subduxerat, aestus complebat. Et honorarias, quae ad ancoras erant delegatae, tempestas adflictabat. Neque ulla nostris facultas aut administrandi aut auxiliandi dabatur. Okay. A long, kind of complicated sentence here. As usual, we'll break it down. It'll make sense. But lots of kind of couplings and whatnot to focus on. So, ita, and so. At the same time, literally in one time. Then we get this et here, and as I said before, if you find a et that seems a little out of place, look for another et. And we do, in fact, have another et down here. And you get the same sort of construction. Et plus an accusative, and then et plus an accusative. So these are probably mirroring each other. So something's going to happen to the longboats, kind of the carriers, I guess, and something's going to happen to the cargo ships, the honorarios. All right. So remember, this is accusative, so something's happening to these boats. And we get a couple of relative clauses. Quibus, by which boats, with which boats, Caesar had taken care to transport the army. So these longboats were Caesar was using to transport his army. Also these boats, the longboats, which Caesar had drawn up onto the dry land. So he's not just leaving them in the ocean. He's pulling them up onto the beach, which would prevent rot and leaks and whatnot. So it's a way to preserve them for a longer period of time. Those boats, which Caesar had used to transport the army and which he had brought up onto dry land, the tide filled. Aistos complebat. Aistos is our subject, complebat our verb, finally explaining why longos naves is in the accusative. So, the tide filled the longboats. And something's going to happen to the cargo boats. So, the cargo ships, which erant delegatai, which had been tied at anchor, tied at anchor. So they're not pulled up onto the beach. They're too big, perhaps, to pull up on the beach. So they are just staying at anchor. What happened to the cargo ships? Tempestas adflictabat. A storm, or the storm, was afflicting them or was damaging them. So this is the same storm that happened up here, right? Such a storm arose that the people who were trying to get to Britain couldn't, and they had to go back to France. It also happened that because there was a full moon, the tide was bigger than usual, so the boats that were on the shore ended up getting damaged by the higher tide, and the storm that happened damaged those boats that were out at sea. So Caesar, just all sorts of bad luck here. So the boats, the longboats on the shore are destroyed, or damaged anyway. They have been flooded. Aistos complebat. And the cargo ships have been damaged by the storm. Nequa ulla nostris facultas aut administrandi aut auxiliandi dabatur. We get this out phrase, aut administrandi, aut auxiliandi. These are gerunds. So genitive gerunds going with facultas. Facultas, third declension, nominative singular. So, and not any opportunity, either of managing or administering, or of helping. So an opportunity to manage these things or to kind of help these things. None of those opportunities were given to our men. So, ulla facultas, your nominative with your passive verb. Dabator takes a dative because something has to be given to somebody. And it's, no opportunity to take care of this stuff. Administrandi et auxiliandi. Probably another situation where Caesar is using synonyms, but one is more physical, concrete, whereas the other is more kind of abstract or metaphorical. So, the administrandi might be the actual kind of like doing of stuff to the actual actions that would be taken to kind of save the ships, whereas the auxiliandi perhaps is the general idea of helping. So, boats are damaged, and our men have no way, nequa ulla nostris facultas, not any opportunity to take care of this stuff was provided for our men. Oh dear, oh dear. Cum pluribus navibus fractis, reliquiae cum essent funibus, ancoris reliquis quar mentis amicis ad navigandum inutiles, magna id quod necesse errata cidera, totius exercitus perturbatio facta est. Definitely containing one of my favorite, I'll call it a Caesarism. One of my favorite things that Caesar does when he's trying to absolve himself of any sort of blame. So, we start with a bunch of what look like ablative absolutes. So, we can start with them as ablative absolutes. If we need to go back and change them to datives or different sort of ablative, we can definitely do that. So, comploribus navibus fractis, with several ships fractured, with several ships broken. The remaining ships, cum essent, we get a cum clause here, and I would say, again, you're never wrong to say when or while, but I encourage you to consider using since or although as well, at least trying out since and although to see if one of those might make better sense for the sentence. And I think since is going to make more sense here. So, and I would honestly, you could probably translate the cum first. Since the remaining ships, so several ships were damaged, not all of them, just several of them. The remaining ships, since they were inutiles ad navigandum, since they were useless for sailing. And then we get this ablative absolute in here describing why they're useless to sailing. So since the remaining ships were useless for sailing with their ropes or cables and their anchors and the remaining tackle lost, the remaining armaments, stuff for sailing, since all those things were lost, ropes and anchors and whatever other tackle you might need, the remaining boats were useless for sailing. And since this was the case, since the remaining ships were useless for sailing and other ships had been destroyed, a great perturbatio magna, we have to go all the way to perturbatio here, a great, you could go with perturbation, a great disturbance, a great upheaval perhaps, of the entire army. Totius exercitus genitives. None of these look like genitives, but they are. Totius, genitive singular. Exercitus, fourth declension, genitive singular here. So a great disturbance of the whole army happened, or was made. And then we get my favorite sort of Caesar phrase here. Id quod necessa erat accidera. Id quod, that which. So, that which was necessary to happen. So, it had no other choice. Of course, there was going to be this great disturbance arising among the whole army, because it just had to, right? When ships are destroyed and the other ships that aren't destroyed have lost all of their stuff for sailing, a great by necessity confusion happened among the whole army. So it's again, it's my he does this a couple of times where it's like it was necessary to happen. It had to happen. Certainly a good leader, even a good leader such as Caesar, would not be able to quell such a disturbance among the ranks. So such a great disturbance of the army, that which was necessary to happen, happened. Nequenim naves erant aliae quibus reportari possent, et omnia deerant quae ad reficiendas naves erant usui, et quod omnibus constabant iemari in Gallia portera, fermentum in his locis in hiemem provisum non erat. Again, Caesar very cleverly, well, let's just see what Caesar does. Neque enim, and for. So, indeed, naves erant aliae, you might switch those words around. There were not other ships on which or by which they, the Romans, were able to be carried back. So, there aren't other ships by which they could be carried back, and everything, long relative clause here, everything which was useful ad reficianas naves, to repairing ships, all the things which were useful for repairing the ships were lacking, were missing. Usui here, dative of purpose. So all the things which were for the use to repair ships were lacking. So they don't have any good ships to sail back to the mainland with. They don't have anything which they can use to repair the ships. And because it was generally agreed, it was agreed by everyone to spend the winter in Gaul, that is on the mainland, not in Britain. I guess, and actually I should put Oportera here. So, because it was generally agreed that it was like necessary or it was appropriate or best to spend the winter in Gaul, grain in these parts, in this location, so grain on Britain, had not been provided for the winter. So, they don't have any boats to sail back to France or Gaul on. They don't have anything to repair the boats that are damaged. And since everybody agreed that it was best to spend the winter in Gaul, the grain was not provided in these places for the winter. In here, perhaps an odd translation, I'm translating it as for. Literally, grain provided into the winter. So they did not have enough grain to make it into the winter. So you could just say grain for the winter is how I would translate it. It's funny because, omnibus constabat, it was generally agreed that it was best to spend the winter in Gaul. It was like, well, yeah, it was generally agreed. Who gives the ultimate orders and commands here? Right? Caesar also apparently thought it was a good idea to spend the winter. And I don't know about you, but if my general tells me that something's a good idea, I'm probably not going to fight back or push back a little bit too much. So Caesar's at fault here, but notice he does not cast blame upon himself. It's just everybody agreed. Everybody thought it was best to spend the winter in Gaul. So of course. All right. So they're in a bad place, and I don't want to spoil anything for you, but this might be a bit of a lie, or at least a bit of an exaggeration, because spoilers, Caesar doesn't die here. He is technically marooned on Britain. By his own words, there were not any boats to carry back, and there wasn't anything to repair the broken boats. We don't have enough food, so by this scenario, he should be dead in about 3 months. They also don't have the cavalry and whatnot, so they're going to have to take over all of Britain or die. Or maybe there's a third option because he's exaggerated. Line 30, or section 30. We'll knock this one out as well. Quibus rebus cognitis, principes Britanniae, qui post proelium ad Caesarem convenerant, era inter se conlocuti, cum et equites et naves et frumentum Romanis deas intellegerent, et pacitate militum ex castrorum exiguitate cognoscerent, quae hoc erant etiam angustior, quod sine impedimentis Caesar legionis transportaverat, optimum factu esse duxerunt, rebellione facta, frumento comeatuque nostros prohibera, et rem inhumem producera, quod hi superatis alt reditu interclusis, neminem postea, belli inferendi causa, in Britanniam transiturum confidebant. Itaqua rursus conjuratione facta, palatem ex castris discedera, et suos clam ex agris deducera, coi perunt. Whoo, look at that sentence. That's basically the whole section. But as always, let's divide it up. So, ablative absolute to kind of sum everything up, a nice standard segue. So, with these things known, that is, with everything that happened in 29 and maybe also 28 known. So, with which things known, the chiefs of Britain, Britannia genitive of the country, not an adjective modifying the chieftains. The chieftains of Britain, the chieftains who, after the battle, had convened to Caesar, had come to Caesar, perhaps met with Caesar. A little looser with the preposition there if you want. So anyway, the chieftains who had come to Caesar after the battle Having spoken, conlocuti, deponent participle, having spoken among themselves or between themselves. And we get cum here. We're going to get a cum clause. I'm just going to go start with when, and we'll talk, we'll see how I feel after I get through it. When, and what's my subjunctive? When intelligent. All right. When they understood that, we're going to get indirect statement here. I see de esse, so there's an infinitive, and oh, yep, there's some accusatives that I can rely upon. So when they understood that the cavalry and the ships and the grain was lacking for the Romans, or was in short supply for the Romans. So when they learned that, or when they understood that, or again, I think since might work as well. Since they understood that boats and cavalry and grain were lacking for the Romans, and since the cum clause governing cognoscerent as well, since they got to know about the paucitatem, about the paucity, about the small number of soldiers, ex castrorum exequitate means here, from the meagerness of the camp, from like the what of the camp, from the just kind of the lightness of the camp. It's not a hustle, and it's not a bustling sort of place. Hustling? It's not very full, right? So they know that there's not a lot of soldiers there. They know that there is a paucity, there is a scarcity of soldiers because of the size of the camp, because of the small size of the camp, ex iguitate. So since they understood this, and since they'd learned that they don't have a whole lot of soldiers they need to fight, we get a relative clause here, and that's going to explain exequitate and paucitatem, or really more paucitatem. They learned about the meagerness, or the scarcity of soldiers, which was even more narrow because of this reason. Namely that Caesar had transported his legions without impediments, without baggage, without kind of all of the accoutrements of war. So it's not the full legion with all of their gear. It's a kind of a light excursion. We'll do what we can for a month or two, and then we're going to head back to Gaul. He is not planning to spend a full season here, right? He's just going to kind of hang out here for a month or two and then head back. So, do that grammar again, because I think it's easier to translate than actually understand what I've said. Which doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it does. So since they understood that all these things were lacking, and since they learned about the small number of soldiers from the meagerness of the camps, which was more narrow, it was even more narrow because of this. I think hoc here, ablative of means. And this ablative of means is working as an antecedent to this relative, essentially a relative clause over here, but you could translate quote as because. But basically, it was more narrow. Sorry, let me see this word real quick. Because hopefully you're as confused as I am, because I'm looking at that and I'm like, I know what it says. But errant is plural, but quae should be singular because angustior is also singular. So I just want to see if this is in fact a typo. So let me look at what you have. Oh, so there's a typo. This is angustiora in the textbook, in the Mueller textbook that we use in class. So quae is a neuter plural going with angustiora, which explains why errant is plural. So that's going to refer to the castra, to the camps. So they learned about the small number of soldiers from the lightness of the camps, the meagerness of the camps which were even smaller for this reason that Caesar had carried the legions over without their baggage. So again, they've got like some temporary camps, but we're not going full on kind of siege mentality or full on occupation. We're just going for a nice summer holiday. So, long sentence, right? Having spoken among themselves, since they learned all these things, Duxerunt, and I think I've talked about Duxerunt before. It means like not they led, but more like they said, or they believed, or they thought. I think we used this back with Orgetrix in Book 1, the Helvetians Duxerunt that. So the chieftains of Britain thought that optimum factu esse. This is fantastic. You get an indirect statement, optimum factu esse, off of Duxerunt, and you get a supine in there. They thought that the best thing to do was more or less the rest of the sentence. So factu, an ablative supine showing respect. The best thing with respect to doing, or like the best thing in a doing sense, was. And then we're going to get these infinitives. The best thing to do was to prohibit our men, to keep our men from these ablatives, to protect or to prevent them from frumento, to protect them from, or prohibit them, I should say. They thought the best thing to do was to prohibit our men from grain, from getting food, and from comeatu, from travel, from going back and forth. So not only can you not get grain, but we're not going to let you like travel from area to area to perhaps get grain or supplies or meet with comrades or whatever the case may be. And they're going to do this, rebellione facta, an ablative absolute. They thought the best thing to do was, with a rebellion made, to prohibit our men from gathering grain and from commerce, from kind of going back and forth, from travel, and to producere rem in hiemem, to draw out the matter into the winter. So they know the Romans don't have the supplies to withstand a whole winter. Winter sucks. They can't just go to the local Walmart and pick stuff up, right? You basically, if you don't have it gathered and stored safely before the winter, you're fresh out of luck, right? You can't just have a whole bunch of food and supplies shipped up from Italy on an aircraft carrier. You're in trouble. So keep the men from replenishing their supplies, and then draw out the affair into the winter. The Romans will basically just starve to death then. Quote, they thought that the best thing to do was all of this because, and then you can go down to the confidebat here, because they trusted or they believed in this very long indirect statement. They believed that with these men conquered, that is the Romans, with the Romans conquered, or with them interclusis ready with them shut off from a return, with them blocked from a return. Interclusis in his is an ablative absolute, just like his and superatis is an ablative absolute. Ready to, ablative of separation. They are shut off from a return. So they believed that, with this situation being the case, they believed that no one afterwards, or after this, they believed that no one would cross transitorum esse, again with infinitives, especially future active infinitives and perfect passive infinitives or perfect deponent infinitives. You can leave esse out. You can just use the participle. They believed that no one would cross over into Britain afterwards, causa bella inferendi, with the cause or for the sake of bringing war, belli inferendi, which is a perfectly valid belief, right? The Romans are the great military force of this hemisphere. If you're in the Europe area, there's basically two people you worry about. You worry about the Germans and you worry about the Romans. And if they could defeat the Romans and scare anybody from coming to Britain again, the people might come to Britain, but they would not come to Britain for the sake of bringing war. They might come to Britain to, do commerce, to do trade, but they're not going to try to conquer Britain. So, a logical choice. In other history in Japan, something kind of like this happened, right? Twice, the ancient Chinese tried to invade Japan and conquer it, from what I understand. And the two times they tried to sail across the sea, the Chinese or Japanese sea of Japan or Sea of China, depending on who you are. Both times a typhoon struck and destroyed the Chinese fleet. And so they're like, well, Japan is clearly protected by the gods. We're not going over there again. And so that's why Japan kind of enjoys, or at least enjoyed, the sort of independence that it had. Even though China could have easily had the manpower to overcome Japan. The Britons were kind of hoping the same thing, right? If we can kind of show those Romans who's boss, other people will be scared of us. And so, with this in their mind, right? And actually, with this in their mind, coniuratione facta, ablative absolute, with a plot made again, or with a conspiracy made again, little by little, they began to depart from the camp, and little by little, or secretly, they began to kind of lead their men from the fields, or kind of gather their men from the fields. So, sorry, that probably sounded terrible. So what that means is the leaders of Britain have been in the camps. They've been meeting with Caesar in the Roman camps. And so so another reason they're going to have kind of a up close view about just how few soldiers there are, right? So they are starting to kind of leave the camps, one by one. This person leaves, and a couple days later, another one leaves, or whatever. So all the chieftains aren't leaving at once, but, leaving a little by little. And they all look the same to the Romans. So, were there 22 of them? Were there 21 of them? I don't know. They're all crazy, big beards, orange hair, whatever. I don't know what they looked like. I assume beards. So they departed little by little from the camps, and secretly began to lead their men from the fields. So up above, they ordered their men to return into the fields, and so kind of go back to your homes and villages. Well, now they're beginning to draw back their men secretly from the fields. So, all right, everybody gather up again. We're going back to war. So, come out of your homes, come out of your villages, whatever. Gather up. It's fighting time again. All right. So things looking dicey for the Romans, but we will wait until next time to figure out what's going to happen. So we'll pick up in Book 4, Section 31 next time, and we'll see. We'll get able to get through 33. We'll see. But Caesar is going to have a plan, because Caesar always has plans. So thank you very much for joining me. If you have any questions, as always, let me know, either in the comments, in class, or via email. If you are not a student, then if you're enjoying this material, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll keep doing this for the duration of the AP curriculum. And if you're not one of my students, or even if you are one of my students and you want me to do a different text for your own benefit, then I'm open to doing that. So let me know. So again, thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you next time. Later.